All right, real quick, let's talk about some data points that are being pointed over here by Game Over 30. This is someone who is on here on Twitter and enjoys the numbers, digs into financial statements and all of that stuff. I really enjoy that piece of the conversation because for the most part, if you're not looking at that, you'll be walking blind and running around and saying some really crazy stuff. So he writes and said, general gaming industry threats / weaknesses. Where have I heard that? U.S. data indicates that young adult, teen, and child participation in the games market has dropped back to 2018 to 2019 levels. A handful of live service games and UGC-driven games are holding more market share than they did in the late 2010s, leaving reduced market share for other titles. Shout out to our audience member who told me you can't play Ghost of Yote day one on on PC. Oh my gosh. You have an awakening that is coming around, because I'm not saying anything bad about Ghost of Yote. I'm just saying that it doesn't necessarily look like it's the most compelling game for a broad audience of gamers. You said games in long-term development may run into shifting genre and cultural trends. This is what PlayStation is going through, especially with their games, The Last of Us 2, which I think was pretty much in a very weird place when it came out. The Last of Us 2 was a very interesting game. Does that make sense? Like, it did okay in terms of sales because there was still kind of a tug of war, but I remember watching the Gamer 2323, big PlayStation fan, in his video, and you could tell that even he, as a PlayStation gamer, was not impressed with a lot of the direction that they went. Mechanics and all, from what I saw, sound and everything, but I never got to play it. PlayStation fans, The Last of Us OG fans said, hey, don't touch that game, even if they pay you to touch it. And I was like, why? They were like, you're just going to be disappointed at many of the story beats. Because for me, Last of Us was pretty much a story-driven game that I enjoyed for the story. Then he said, saturated beyond saturated. Oh, come outside. Every major platform is flooded with games. This is what I'm telling y'all about these so-called exclusives that y'all are going ahead and carrying all over the place. That, my dude, there are just so many games out there, you won't be able to see. Everyone has to go ahead now and find ways to get attention. Even when, according to him, we account for the clones, asset flips, and AI experimental nonsense, the supply side is still far too heavy for its own good. This, in my opinion, is something that anyone who is talking about video games needs to always acknowledge. When you see some showcase or you see some game or you see whatever, you must go ahead and acknowledge that the market is saturated. For those of you who are on the Xbox side, and I know, I would talk about stuff from PlayStation fanboys, how they're always touting so-called exclusives. They're not selling as much compared to the number of consoles out there. You sell 75 million units of your console. Astrobot is still looking like what? The reason is because there's saturation in the market. If you're on the Xbox side, here is something that you need to realize and you need to, go ahead and undertake. Xbox is bringing out 10, maybe 11 games this year across the board. And even and these are old games. PlayStation is going to be seeing a good number of those games, right? But you also got to remember that Xbox is not only in competition with PlayStation. Xbox is in competition with the third-party developers as well. I've made this claim that PlayStation haven't been in competition with third-party developers who publish on their platform because their game will launch, then an Elden Ring will launch, then their game wants to launch, then an Elden Ring Night Rain would launch, then their game wants to launch, then a freaking Hogwarts Legacy game launches, then their game will launch, then a Call of Duty game launches, because they're pretty much in strong and stiff competition with these games. Do y'all remember that Hogwarts Legacy sold over twice as much as Marvel Spider-Man, 2, right? PlayStation would have loved to be the one that sold 25 million units of Marvel Spider-Man, while Hogwarts Legacy sold 12, but there's only so much money that can go around in these single-player games and these single-player titles. And looking at Matt Piscatella's data set, there's only 4% of gamers who will be willing to spend that kind of money in acquiring these games. So when you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, it actually does make a whole lot of sense right now to see that this market saturation is something that exclusivity and exclusive games in the Xbox and PlayStation ecosystem need to come in on a more humble approach, in the sense of, we're coming to get our gamers to see what we like. You got to come in and you got to appeal to your gamers and say, hey man, our gamers, we want to basically get you a game that you're going to love, you're going to like, because you come in with that perspective. I think gamers are more likely to give you a chance. Look at games like Lies of P. did very well. Had a Game Pass launch. The developers were excited. They respected their fans. They gave them a quality game. Look at Stalker 2. Even with its own challenges, the developers were very, very respectful. They were very humble about their game. They gave their fans what it is that they wanted, that experience in terms of the game Stalker. And they've also exposed their, their game to 6 million players. That's 6 million possible customers at the end of the day, or non-customers, depending on how you want to look at it. So with these trends and with these threats, which are pretty much everything I've been saying, I mean, think about it. You have to basically go ahead and realize that there is one thing that really is going to make, the gaming industry shift. And that's where, like the Vice article I read, collaboration is what's going to change the industry. The talk about exclusivity, at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think it's true. I saw another comment from an audience member. True Knights Gaming, shout out to you. You said, exclusivity, exclusives will always, PlayStation will still have exclusives. Nobody is saying that they won't. Does that make sense? But I think their stance probably now needs to shift from, exclusive console without anybody else for a year or a year and a half, which, I mean, they'll fire developers to make it seem like, oh, it's only here you can play this. But it's not sustainable for the market. You said because even though these game budgets are high, first-party games only account for 10% of PlayStation's revenue. Sony makes most of its money, just like Steam, being a marketplace. Dude, they just put out their financials. Look it up. Oh, we looked up their financials. Their margin was 7%. It's a very small margin. Why do y'all act like because they make all this money, then it's okay? No, their profits are abysmal. It's obvious that the place where they can make the most money right now, of which console sales don't bring in as much, is from their first-party titles. Because the cadence of the third-party titles that sell as much copies is not really as high. Hence, they got to look somewhere, and that somewhere is in-house, where they punch out their own games. Therefore, if they sell more copies of games, I think it would track that this is a logical stance, right? That if they were to sell more of their games, they're able to push their margins forward. This is what Xbox did for the 6 years that it was being, pummeled in the head, or how many years after the Xbox One launch and the console sales were basically in the pooper. They went ahead and they launched their games on PC and were able to make a lot of money. The data was very clear when we saw the Steam best games of all those years, 2021, 22, 23, 24, even 2018, 19. We got to see Xbox games thriving in these categories in terms of how much revenue they were bringing in for the company, and how many games and how many gamers they were able to serve across the board. So again, sure, they'll have exclusives, but what are the exclusives there for if you're not selling much of them? And two, if you're basically hemorrhaging cash because your margin as a multi-billion-dollar corporation is about 7%. We looked at their financials. That's the thing that many people don't want to go ahead and admit. Their financials looked good on the revenue coming inside, but then in terms of how much money that they could basically keep in their pockets post expenses was just weird. Does that make sense? So again, sure, maybe y'all are, could say you're satisfied with a 7% margin, but when you talk to business owners, many of them will tell you that 7% is a joke. It's not necessarily the most healthy business out there running on those kinds of margin. Now, don't get me wrong, Xbox probably still has its own work to do, but if you think about its own revenue and its own possible margin, it's higher in that regard. And they're not spending, in terms of their annual revenue, they're not spending as much in terms of their their annual expenses to basically go ahead and get a small margin in that regard. So I don't know if you care about the health of PlayStation's business, or if you're not taking a look at what's going on with the layoffs and them not hiring or doing any more contracts in that regard. Maybe they're hiring in some other studios, but with Ballistic Moon, they didn't renew any contracts with them. And so when you think about it, what are they trying to do? They're trying to manage costs because that margin is super low. So production is going to take a hit, if you feel me. So again, I just wanted to go ahead and point that out there. But these are my thoughts, and shout out to Game Over 30. He really put some really cool stuff out here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching the video. Appreciate you all so much. Peace out.